Good afternoon. I take immense pleasure in welcoming you all to the workshop on career goals, planning, and advancement. I've always found it difficult, and finding it so even today, to put real sense to the conundrum survival versus gratifying career advancement. It is important what one aspires for, whether fullness or mouth-watering paychecks. The former defines the career, while the latter suits the individual seeking for survival. Ironically, given the contemporary settings, one can also coalesce the two and say, find out what you like doing best and get someone to pay for it. Sounds smart, doesn't it? But what remains to be answered is how to close the gap between requirement and potential. So this is the focus of today's workshop, identifying what you want and finding out who can pay for it. So we have here with us experts from the arms of PSU, private sectors, academia, and entrepreneurship to share with us their expectations and career objective in their respective professions. So I take honor and privilege of introducing to the arena our distinguished panelists. Dr. GVN Apparao, IT advisor and technical consultant. So I'd like you to occupy the dais. Mr. Sudhakar Potukuchi, Head, Eaton India Engineering Center. Professor Shankar Narsimhan, Department of Chemical Engineering, IIT Madras. Dr. Bala Bharadwaj, Director, Boeing Research and Technology, India. Mr. Kishore Padmanabhan, Vice President and Member, TCS Corporate Tech Board. Dr. Ram Mohan Rao, Deputy Director, Structural Engineering Research Center. Mr. A.S. Basu, Managing Director, Chennai Petroleum Corporation Limited. Professor Ashok Jhunjhunwala, Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Madras. So firstly, I take the pleasure of inviting Dr. Mahesh Panchagula, faculty in the Department of Applied Mechanics, who will be moderating today's session. Dr. Bala Bharadwaj, Director, Boeing Research and Technology, India.
Good afternoon, students. When Ishita asked me about this workshop, and we had in fact talked about it several times, we had done a couple of versions of this in our department for our scholars after we identified that that sort of a focus on identifying a career is something that our research scholars need some training in. So that was the sort of motivation to put this workshop together. We're indeed honored to have a panel of extremely distinguished people representing various professions. And sort of in a nutshell, the objective is this. All of our panelists have in some capacity or the other interviewed candidates just like you. So today is your day to ask questions without the threat of an interview hanging in the balance. Okay, so you have the freedom now to ask what they are going to ask you if you were to attend an interview at their organizations. So I don't want to take much time. I'm going to introduce the format briefly, and then we'll go into our panel discussion. I would request each of our panelists to say a few words, let's say about between 10 to 15 minutes, focusing on the expectations in their respective professions. And we'll have sort of a brief question answer session in this setting, following which there is a more there's a more intimate interaction that you can have with the panelists over tea, which is scheduled right after this workshop. So with that, I would request Dr. Basu to.
There are 8 of us, so to make it interactive, let's possible keep it under 10 minutes.
Yes.
And even less. And
Yes.
we can do more question answer.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. So may I request Dr. Basu to start us off? Thank you.
I'm a chemical engineer by profession and working last 30 years in the oil refinery. I don't know what group of from this are from the chemical engineering discipline. I have a slide presentation, but it is primarily from the refining field. If you will be interested, I will go for the presentation. Otherwise, I'll be still brief and talk something. I think that's a better choice. I would say that energy is a general thing. Energy demand is growing, and it's growing all over the world. The primary energy demand at the rate of almost cumulative average growth rate is 1.6, 1.5%. In India, China, it's much more. It's 3%, China is still higher. And if I come down to the field of oil, the demand for oil in the country is growing at the rate of about 5%, 4.5 to 5%. That's the growth rate that's expected in the next about 10 years. Within these products also, I would say that we have the huge refining capacity in the country of about 200 million metric tons per annum. Whereas the demand in the country is less than that. We have surplus in products. We export products. We export products as per specification of the world requirement. It's open. The product goes outside. And within country also, the demand is about 150 million ton as on date. And the surplus capacity is around 50 million tons. Now that from 150 million tons, if we look at the product slate, the biggest demand is of diesel, as about 65 million tons out of that 150 million tons. And the petrol is something around 15 or 18 million tons, around that numbers. And the diesel is growing at the rate of again about 4.5%. Coming down, furnace oil, which is a heavier product, this is not growing, this is shrinking. But when we get the crude oil, it has got both the diesel as well as furnace oil from it. So the challenge is how to reduce the furnace oil. Not only that, the crude oil, which we are getting today at cost of about $110 a barrel or $115 a barrel sometimes, the crude oil is getting heavier and heavier, and it is contaminated with a heavy metals, asphaltings, these type of heavier stuffs more and more. As a result, the technology need for today is how we upgrade, how we handle this kind of crude oil. Certain technologies are available in the market, and the research are continuously on how these upgradation can be made more and more, how we can give more and more better products, value-added products to the user. Third point is the products like naphtha, demand is again coming down. It's a petrochemical area where it can go, but petrochemical from gas is more economical. As a result, naphtha goes for the exports. The price is less. So that's another area where challenge, how to reduce the production of naphtha or convert naphtha into some other thing. Coming to the products also, or rather again I start with the crude, the heavier crude, high acid crude. There's a challenges in the metallurgy, whether we can go for the additive treatment, how the additives should be, how it can protect the metallurgy of the equipments in a oil refinery. And coming down to the bottommost product, furnace oil, there are technologies to upgrade either carbon rejection or hydrogen addition. Hydrogen is a costly utility, very costly utility. It is to be produced from naphtha. And if there are technologies, or rather we are for the technologies which consume less of hydrogen. Whatever petrol or whatever diesel we use today in the market, it has sulfur of 50 ppm at Chennai. Outside Chennai, it is 350 ppm. These treatments are done with the hydrogen. We remove sulfur from the diesel, making H2S, and finally removing elemental sulfur. But if we can have a technology in the market which is extraction driven, which can remove sulfur through extraction, yes, why not? Why should we consume hydrogen? So that's another area. Area to handle heavy crude, area to handle crude with heavy metals, area for upgrading bottom of the barrel, and areas for reducing the hydrogen consumption, converting naphtha to petrochemicals, and then from the coke, that's carbon rejected from the crude, whatever coke we get, this coke can go to gasifiers, and then either by Fischer-Tropsch technology synthesis to liquid petroleum, or it can also go for production of hydrogen. But gasifier is a costly technology. A lot of research is necessary how to make this technology available at a cheaper cost to the general public. These are the few areas within the industry. And then coming to, again, industry, but not directly to process, but it is very much related to the process, that is energy. In any refinery, almost 8 to 10% of our crude goes for fuel. If the processes are more energy efficient, if the processes can consume with a lesser heat input, we can convert that also into product. So that's another area, how make both the equipments and also the process more and more energy efficient. It's not only improves the bottom line, not only make available more product, but also for the environment is a boon. It reduces the CO2 emission and thereby reduces the greenhouse gas and the heating effect or the general warming up of the environment. So that's another very, very important area. Simultaneously, resource conservation. Coming to the area of water. Water is a natural resources, and energy and water consumption practically go hand in hand. If we want to generate energy, generate some product, we need to consume water. So technologies, how we can consume less of water, how we can recycle water, and how we can minimize the consumption of water, that's a challenge for us. In Chennai, the fresh water available to an industry is at a cost of 60 rupees per meter cube, as against all over world, all over India, around 10 to 15 rupees per meter cube. Even the sewerage we purchase at Chennai Petroleum at cost of 10 rupees per meter cube. That's sewerage, CT sewer, primary treated CT sewer. We further treat it through ultrafiltration and membrane, different type of membranes, and then finally use it in our refinery. That's an area how we can consume, how we can generate, or how we can, the processes can be improved upon with a less and less consumption of water. For the researchers in the industry, the avenues available are the companies, the oil companies, they have their own research institutes. Indian Oil has the biggest, almost in the Asia, one of the biggest research institute at Faridabad. Bharat Petroleum has a research institute at Delhi. Hindustan Petroleum, they are setting up a research institute at Bangalore. In Chennai Petroleum, we also do have a small research institute at our Manali refinery area. These oil companies spend almost around 1% of their profit. Oil companies' turnover is very high, but the profits are low. And I would say 100, 150 crores Indian Oil spends sometimes almost 300 crores. Indian Oil has a very big research development center. Other than that, Oil Industry Development Board and Center for High Technology, these are institutes who comes up for researches and supports the researches for the in the refining or the petroleum area, be it exploration, be it in the area of refining. The Scientific Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, they review the processes, the research subjects, and then they recommend their whether they can be funded by UIDB and CHT. I have given certain inputs where what are the requirements by the refining industry and what are the research avenues already are available. It's a great challenge for the oil refiner to remain with a positive bottom line. It's a very big challenge for us today. The pressures on the crude and product prices, whatever you read from the newspapers, we face daily in our day-to-day life. The research can help us, and industry and researchers are to work together for this development. There are many technologies developed by industry. Indian Institute of Petroleum, Dehradun, is an area where very many process technologies have been developed. Some of them have been implemented, and it's for the industry, for us to take up this challenge and take these technologies into practice. That's the dream of any scientist, that's the dream of any research scholar, that his technology coming into the effect. The gaps normally remain the support. Once the technology is developed, along with that, a lot of support is required, both from engineering point of view as well as from process point of view. Once these are available, industry is open for adopting the indigenous technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Basu, for pointing us to the employment opportunities and the technological requirements thereof. Entrepreneurship is sort of the driver of growth in most industrial economies, and we have the. Okay, fine. Then let Sudhakar say a few words. You have the presentation. Okay, we'll hear from Professor Jhunjhunwala a little later on. We have, to give us sort of the other side of the coin, we have several representatives of the private sector. We'll start with Dr. Sudhakar, who is currently the head of Eaton India Engineering Center.
Again, thanks for the opportunity. I graduated in '92 from this institute, so whenever I come to the institute, there is a lot of nostalgic feelings. What I want to cover is, I don't want to take you through the requirements, quickly going through, probably many of you may not know about Eaton, so I'll take very few minutes. I'll try to complete in 10 minutes. Can you go to the next slide, please? Eaton is more than 100 years old company. We are, about 16.3 billion 2012, and over 100,000 employees, or more than 150 countries, and more than 50% of the sales outside North America, headquartered in Cleveland. Sandy Cutler is the CEO. What we do, we are a power management company, like all the things that Mr. Basu talked about. World is going through a lot of crisis right now in terms of, the energy demands are growing. Environmental pollution is another challenge. So while meeting the demands of the energy, you also need to curtail the environmental issues. So with that, it's like called a 4X challenge. When the demands are increasing, how do you reduce the pollution simultaneously? So our job as Eaton is to provide power management solutions which are safe, reliable, efficient, and sustainable. So anything to do with mechanical power, electrical power, hydraulic power, our job is to provide energy efficient solutions which are sustainable. So there are a whole gamut of things. I encourage all of you to go to the website, and there are requirements posted so you can see it. What I want to cover is, going to the next slide, we have an engineering center based in Pune. This is an engineering center which supports the entire Eaton globally. We have more than 1,000 employees working in the center. in various departments. You name the field, whether it is mechanical, electrical, materials. We have requirements, and we do work in terms of the product development, a little bit of advanced research, and also product enhancements and existing product engineering and certain technology solutions. Again, I encourage you to go through the website. What I really want to talk about is whenever we have these openings, people do apply for these positions, and the success rate is probably very, very small. And I would like to tell you why that is small, and probably that will give you certain hints about what you need to work upon to increase that success rate. Most of the time, it's like a iceberg, right? Most of the time, you people focus on things which are, above. What are the technical skills? Okay, people are asking for structural analysis. So let me get an MTech in structural analysis or a machine design, and the requirements say that, MTech in machine design is required. So you think, it's all done, but most of the time, that is not what gives you the job. What gives you the job is we have certain behavior-based interview techniques that people use in most of the corporations, any big corporation. And what people are looking for is your behavioral characteristics. What drives you? What drives you as an engineer, as a researcher? What are some of those traits that you bring to the table? What are your work ethics? What kind of motivational characteristics do you have? What is your potential? Those are some of the things we will be a lot more interested in. Though the job description talks about a lot of things which you see in your courses and things like that, but it's required. That's more like an entry ticket. Once you have it, there are a lot of other things that will be not talked about so much, but the interview will be more based on your passion and the attitude that you bring to the table. So let me elaborate a little bit on that. If I want to go little deeper into those things, what are some of the things which will really enable your career? Career is not about getting a position and changing your job one after another. It's more about, first thing is, do you know what is your definition of success? It means different things for different people. Somebody may say that becoming a millionaire or a billionaire is my definition of success. Nothing wrong about it. So somebody may say that I want to become a world-class scientist in certain field. Absolutely not a problem. But do you know what is your definition of success? That's extremely important. Most of the time we don't spend enough time in defining what is success personally means to me. Unless you define that, what happens is when you go through these interviews, you'll tend to make mistakes. You'll tell certain things, and the moment I show you some other opportunity, you will say that, yeah, I want to do that also. Basically, what you're saying is just give me a job, and you will definitely fail the interview. So start thinking about what is personal definition of success for you. The second thing is, in the morning it was talked about, fire in the belly. When you say fire in the belly, how much of risk have you taken in your careers? When I say risk, it need not be being stupid in terms of what are the most challenging assignments that you have handled, and what are the difficulties that you faced in your professional career or even in your academic career. Have you solved any difficult problems? Have you tried solving them? Did you fail? Some of these questions could be something like, what is the biggest failure that you faced? What is the biggest risk you have taken in your life? When we are asking those questions, what we are looking at is, are you just doing things that are given to you, or are you stretching yourself to take certain high risk items and taking that initiative? That's what we are looking at. Curiosity, again, it was talked about in the morning. When you talk about curiosity, most of the time what happens is people describe the project that they have done. When you ask, where it can be applied, can you stretch your imagination? Or what other things, what it mimics. Similar thing we have observed in a different field. What about it? When you ask those questions, people are not at all curious. It's not about the job, it's also about, how much of perspective you have about the project or the work that you have done, and are you curious? Are you, we are not just looking at the job that you have done. Absolutely. Again, as I told you before, that is basic entry ticket. But what we are looking for is, what is the curiosity that you have? Are you really curious about, in the morning they were talking about Hindu newspaper, science and technology column. Are you really curious? If you answer some of those questions, that becomes automatically, you are one of those, you're building your brand around certain things, right? Focus on performance. Again, I find most of the cases, people, when you asked about their own project, sometimes it's not, people talk about the project, but if you ask 2 levels deeper questions, you tend to not answer them very well. So when you write something on your resume saying that I know X, Y, Z, it's not like you have done for 2 days on 2 things and then you write it on your resume. When you say you have done it, people are going to probe you a lot more deeper on those kind of things, and if you fail on any one of those things that you have written, that reflects on your overall resume or overall performance. So you need to be extremely careful. Broadening perspectives is again very, very important thing. Broadening perspectives means it's not just about your hobbies, somebody working on organizing some things like this, and much broader than just the task that is given to you and successfully completing with a 10-point GPA or CGPA. That's not just what we are looking for. We are looking for much broader perspective, so that with your curiosity you are able to apply things. Finally, being a research scholar, the expectation will be that, are you learning new things? Are you practicing them, what you learned? It's not like I have like 10 degrees, so I should be the greatest on earth. It's not about what you learned, but how much you have applied, and are also teaching. Because in industry, one thing that we clearly look for is, it's not just about what you learned and applied and how great you are, but how many people you can bring along with you. So are you teaching? So teaching skills become extremely important. You think only in academic career teaching is important, but in industry we do teach a lot to our colleagues. Blockers. When you talk about the blockers, if you don't have technical expertise, you don't even have an entry ticket, so forget about it, okay? Then just because you have a great technical expertise, that doesn't mean everything also. That's where I'm coming from in terms of company values. Every company has got their set of values. If you don't conform to any of the values, if your personal values don't sync up with the company's values, there is no point even trying, because you won't go much farther in that particular company. Interpersonal skills. How do you get your things done? How do you interact with different people? Especially when you talk about innovation, you need to commercialize it. When you need to commercialize it, you need to talk with marketing people, you need to talk about sourcing people, you need to talk about manufacturing. So with all these diverse set of people, how you are connecting and how you are able to get things done, that is extremely important. That is interpersonal skills. Some of those people don't report to you. You need to influence them. You need to influence without authority. That becomes extremely important. People who don't take initiative, and how do you check whether somebody will take an initiative or not? We'll go and ask you what are some of the initiatives that you have taken during your PhD, your research scholar, or during your school days, things like that. You go back into the history and keep asking for what kind of initiatives you have taken. Being a team player, again, it's a cliche, but it's extremely important. If you are not a team player, even if you get into an organization, you won't survive long. Too narrow focused or lacking focus, both are, again, you need to have the focus, but at the same time, you should also keep expanding your breadth. Both are important. Communication skills, again, it was talked about in the morning, so I don't want to repeat. Articulation is so important. If you have a great idea, the most difficult thing is simplifying it. The complex thing is simplifying things rather than talking about a complex thing. Most of the time we take pride in saying that how complex it is, but the reality is simplifying the complex thing is where you add a lot of value. And if you don't know how to articulate your ideas crisply, your ideas, you will not be able to influence, so you won't get funding. If you don't get funding, you will not work on that project. If you don't work on that project, you won't grow. You will be working on somebody else's ideas. Extremely important. So to me, these are some of the blockers. If you don't have it, it's done. Again, if you put 2 dimensions, competency and personal passion, you can think of 4 blocks, right? If you're low on competency and then you're low on a passion, nobody can help you. Whereas if you have lot of passion for something, but you are not good at it. I'm very passionate about music, but I can't sing. I can't play any instrument. Then practice will help you to get to somewhere. I mean, that's on the, the corner there. And if you are low on passion, but you're high on competencies, that means you get me all the jobs done. I'll keep paying you, and then you'll get stuck in a career. That's the dollar sign where it is showing. For example, you want to be an academician, you want to be a world-class academician doing independent research and advancing science and all those kind of things, but you come to an organization where it is mostly applied engineering. Okay, you may be technically brilliant, so you may be producing a lot of results for me. So what I keep telling you as a private organization is continue producing those results because you are very good. But that may not be your passion. Again, a very subtle thing, I don't know whether I'm able to communicate very effectively in the short time, but take a look at it. It's extremely, that's a trap. The final thing is, the pure joy comes when you are able to find something where your passion and your ability to deliver results will both match. And that's where you need to keep striving for. And as a process, yeah, this is the last one. As a process, you need to, as I told you, you need to define your success and strengths and opportunities where you need to improve, and you need to plan for it and implement and monitor that. I mean, that's a cycle and it's never done. You think you are done on that and your career is actually finished. That is something which it's a cycle which needs to continue, and I keep doing that. Okay, it's not just about you people. So why I presented this whole thing is more to get your thoughts around these, and anything else on these things I'll be able to happy to answer, and thank you.
Thank you, Sudhakar. Thank you, Dr. Sudhakar, for that sort of an overall view of how a career progresses. And we're all academics here, and from a survey we did yesterday, we had a short pre-workshop yesterday. Majority of the research scholars actually want to go into academic jobs, and I was actually quite happy to hear that fit of the requirements of the country and the wishes of our scholars. And to tell us more, we have Professor Shankar Narasimhan to tell us about what it takes to be an academic and what's in it for us.
I'm glad that Mr. Sudhakar listed a lot of properties that are required to be successful in any career, not just academics or industry and so on. So that is across the board. And my aim the next 10 minutes is to essentially tell you or sell the academic career to you. If you're already convinced that you want to be an academic, my job is over. I should probably stop here. But nevertheless, what are the components of an academic career, and how you can actually derive maximum happiness out of this job, as also having a fulfilling career. So quickly, this is often said that those who can do, but those who can't teach, and that's a myth. And I would like to submit to you by the end of this thing that we not only teach, but we also do, and also have a nice life doing it. See, let's actually quickly run through the kind of expectations of any profession. I mean, when you take up a job, you say, well, first thing is financial security. Most of you seem to put that ahead. I'm not too sure that's the order in which that you might say it, but seems to me that the current generation looks at financial remuneration as a very important ingredient of any profession. I would think there are other things that you may or may not have thought about. Creativity and independence are an important component of any profession that you want to take up. I would also say that homework balance is a very important aspect of your life. It's not just work all the time, but you need to actually have a reasonable family life, and that also defines a quality. You need prestige and respect. Many of us, may not admit it, but a pat on the back always makes us feel very good, and that's we expect from a profession. A sense of achievement, satisfaction when you are about to leave this world. I think that's something that you want to go out with. So let's look at all the components of an academic career. This needs no emphasis. Everybody knows it, that you'll be doing a lot of teaching. But teaching does not imply that within the four walls of a classroom. It also means that you conduct workshops for industry people, for other college teachers. You also actually write books. These are all elements of teaching. Okay, so don't just say that Giving a few lectures in a classroom is all teaching is all about. As a research, another component of academic career, in which you are guiding students in order to realize their potential, in order to actually enable them to understand things better and probably contribute meaningfully once they graduate. There are a lot of aspects of research, presentations, publishing, and so on, which you also have to be good at and acquire these skills. You could also talk about administration as a part of typical academic work element, which is essentially in the organizational structure, how you want to actually manage the whole institute as effectively as you can, get the best out of the people you hire, basically. That's an academic organizational aspect of academic institute. We also do other things that, we interface with industry. There are, where we provide solutions to practical problems. And I'm today increasingly, you can see with the establishment of the IITM Research Park, and I'm assuming other institutes will follow. In fact, IIT Bombay already has it, IIT Kanpur has it, IIT Delhi has it. You incubate and grow companies. That's also an opportunity that you have. It is not just that if you're an academic, all you do is just teach research, but there are also other aspects which you might want to consider. Okay. So let me come to the first element that he talked about, financial remuneration. Everybody asks, is it really, are you getting paid well? I can tell you very frankly, with the 6-pay commission, that you have income for very comfortable living and you have future security. I don't want to disclose my assets, of course, to you, but I do that to the government. I can tell you that I've done fairly well without too much help from others. You do have extra income for other entertainment and so on, what we call the disposable income. But I can tell you that, if you're going to ask whether your classmate who knew less about the subject is making more money than you, I'm sure that there will be several who will be making more money than you. And if you constantly look at that, you will always be an unhappy person. So keeping up with the Joneses is not the kind of thing that I would say I recommend as to anybody. And if you are in academics, maybe you can't keep up with your colleagues. That's something that you have to think about. This should not be if you are actually the kind of person who's always looking at your neighbor and say, I have to be as rich as that, you will be forever unhappy unless you are Warren Buffett or Bill Gates. So let's, otherwise, I do think that you have a fairly comfortable living being an academic. Besides this, there are lots of perks that you get, which we don't really, it's not in monetary terms. Housing, for example, most institutes have their own campuses, including private ones. You go to VIT, Vellore, or you go to Shastra, they all have their own colonies where they provide you a fairly good housing. It's not just IIT, okay? And very fairly good living facilities. Typically, they have a lot of facilities at your thing, which is healthcare, sporting, entertainment. All of these are available at a stone's throw, which you don't have if you are actually a private thing and living in a city. You get a lot of allowances which we don't even consider as part of salary, which is whether it's LTC or any of these. We just assume that, somehow we get it. All of this is thing. Secondly, I think unlike other professions where you grow very old very fast, in fact, you can look at how many of us have lost their hair and have white hair. You will see that as an academic, I still have this. So longevity is something that you have in academics. The primary reason for it is you're forever young in this profession. And therefore, for the government seems to be increasing the retirement age, and therefore I'm sorry, you'll only die in harness. It's impossible otherwise. Okay, so the most important part of the profession, which I think is creativity. Whenever you say that you're happy, you need a job or a profession where you can be creative all throughout the time. Every minute of the day. And I think the academic career is the one that offers you, because there are several things, whether when you're teaching or whether you're doing research. It's a perspective. You will say, well, it's all written. I go to the textbook, I read it and present it. That's not the truth at all. The information growth you can see in the last 10 years is just exploded in every field. Secondly, the methods by which you actually deliver. There are lots of tools today available that actually allows you to take the same material and present it in extremely interesting ways. Not just for higher education, but also for school children. It's just unbelievable. Only now, as a startup, when we are looking at education, are we actually even scratching the surface. There are excellent opportunities to use modern tools to convey the same subject matter very, very interesting, in very, very interesting ways. So don't think teaching is a dead end. In fact, it's one of the most alive, what I would call the aspects of an academician. Research, it's an area where clearly you need creativity. You are talking about problems which others haven't even posed. You are talking about approaches which others haven't thought of. You are talking about experiments, demonstration of phenomena which others haven't even looked at before. So all of these are things that create completely creation of your own, or coming out of your own intellectual curiosity and ability. So I don't think any other profession can offer you the kind of creativity that an academic career can give you. Independence. So with all doing all these things, is somebody telling you to do it? Absolutely not. What subject you teach, what topics you cover, how do you actually choose the problems for your research, whether you want to do it industrially useful or you want to do blue sky, whether you want to do theoretical or experimental, it's completely self-driven. No other, whatever one might say, there will always be a boss in every other profession. There is no boss. In fact, I will say this, the director of this institute has no hold over me. Okay, publicly I can tell you this, right? So I'm free to choose the way I do things, and that's true of only academic career. Homework balance. I mean, this is something that you might not say. What I mean by this, it doesn't mean that, that you have to be. What you need is freedom of time, flexi time. I think an academic career offers you that. You're not bound by a 9 to 5. You don't have to punch in a card and punch out. I think, you have this flexibility of working in the middle of the night. I have taken classes at 12 at midnight. And provided of course, my students agree to it. So it's very clear that you have this flexi timing that allows you to work around whatever emergencies that might arise at home. And that's what I mean by homework balance. You need some certain flexibility. I'm sure a lot of faculty members actually drop their children to school and so on during times, office hours. The reason, I'm not saying this, they're saying they're wasting their time. It's actually the flexibility that gives you that. So they can make up for it during evening times or early mornings. I know of faculty members who start their day at 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I don't think private industry, anybody is doing that kind of a thing. So there is hardly any time wasted in traveling. You see, most of the people in industry spend a lot of time traveling from place A to place B, whether to place of work, whether in terms of whether it's marketing, sales, whatever. But clearly here, you just roll out of bed and you're in office. Or your bed itself is your office, if you want to be. Okay. Living environment, I don't think, if you're in a campus of this type, I don't see, I mean, can you get any better? I mean, this is paradise on earth, right? So, and it's not just the IITs provided. There are a lot of now campuses which are self-contained in various ways. I mean, should I talk about prestige and respect? I mean, clearly, your peers respect you if you do well, but most importantly, your students. After 30 to 25 years, the first thing I look at it, the kind of what I call love and affection that they have. I'm not too sure you can create this in a private industry at all. And society, well, I know that in recent times they don't seem to think much of a thing, but even now, when I actually go and meet up with my friends, school friends, I may not be the most financially the better off than most of them, but clearly they have never addressed me by my first name. Professor so-and-so has come. I mean, it's the kind of awe and thing that with which they look. It's clearly the most respected profession. I can't see it any other way. At the end of the day, I mean, I'd say sense of satisfaction. How do you get satisfaction? You need to actually go back and say, well, did I make a difference? I mean, I came to this world. I mean, we don't know why we came. We are like ants moving around. But at the end of the day, when you actually summarize your life after 30, 40 years, you'll ask, what is it that I did? I think shaping individuals. Every day when you're teaching, when you're actually through your interaction with your students, you're shaping a whole community. And year after year, young people who can be molded. Again, mentoring, this kind of opportunity, which profession provides you? I can't think of it. Their conduct. I think, most of us, when we spend time with the thing, when we see a good thing, this is a place where you can influence students much more than any other thing. I mean, their whole life you can touch. In fact, I know several of my students who have gone into social work just because I mentioned that as an important thing in your life. And it's very nice to see when they come back and say they are having a fulfilling life just because they interacted with me. National development, clearly, the kind of work you do, whether you contribute to the space program or the nuclear research program and so on and so forth, industrial thing, clearly, then there's an opportunity you can go back and say with a sense of satisfaction, you did something for this nation. So conclusion, yes, we can do and can have a fulfilling life.
Thank you, Professor Narasimhan, for that very insightful view of academic career. Now, those, like I said, anybody that is patriotic, this is this is the best fit of your degrees and your training to the needs of the country. You know, almost a third of the country is yet to come up to school age, to college age. To give us the research perspective in the public sector, we have Dr. Ram Mohan Rao from SCRC in Taramani, which is a CSIR lab, to tell us about the expectations in public sector research. And just one small thing, you know, there's a reason why world over classes are 50 to 55 minutes. It surprisingly coincides with human attention span, at least at this age. So we'll do that. We'll take a short 5 to 10 minute question answer break after Dr. Ram Mohan Rao. Then we'll start our sort of views discussion.
Good afternoon. See, I'm from Structural Engineering Research Center, which is the adjacent to IIT. Professor Shiv Kumar has asked me that come here and just make a small presentation on the research skill sets what required to get into CSIR. Actually, we also do the research similar to what the IITs do, probably slightly different. We probably may not concentrate much on the basic research. We do most of the application research. And Professor Narasimhan has made my life much easier because he told all the things which are essential ingredients of a research profession. So what probably I do is, I'm not certainly doing a marketing here for CSIR. Also, probably I may not be the right guy to talk about the CSIR, which has got about 37, 38 laboratories. Maybe a PPD guy may do better. What I try to do is, I try to show some of the things, what CSIR is doing, and what is the focus of CSIR, and probably that probably gives you an idea how you choose a career in the laboratories like CSIR. Probably can you go back? So this is the organizational structure of the government R&D, and probably CSIR comes under Department of Science and Industrial Research, and you have got biotechnology, atomic energy, science and technology, and also Department of Space and Department of Ocean Development and Earth Science. So I represent the CSIR, probably one institute, Structural Engineering Research Center. And you got 60 years of science, and probably I'm not very sure whether you can see the machine. I can't read that. Probably I leave it, it's very small. We'll go next. These are the CSIR institutes, and probably you can see any of the disciplines. Every discipline will be encompassed in that. Anybody, any of the areas, probably you find a job in CSIR laboratories. We've got about 37 laboratories and spread over all over the country. And this is the management structure of CSIR. It comes under Ministry of Science and Technology, and you got a Director General, and after that you have got laboratories, and you got you can see biological sciences, chemical sciences, engineering sciences, physical and information sciences, and I gave the different laboratories which we come under engineering sciences. And these are the core competencies. You can see biological sciences, chemical sciences, engineering sciences, and physical information sciences, which CSIR covers. These are the achievements of CSIR. As I said, I just would like to show what sort of a research CSIR do. It's a unique mix of multidisciplinary expertise, sound technical knowledge and talent for innovation that characterize CSIR, enabled it to emerge as a global player. CSIR footprint covers sectors as diverse as aerospace, biotechnology, chemicals, drug and pharmaceuticals, energy, food and food processing, information dissemination, leather, metal, minerals and manufacturing, to name a few. As you can see, CSIR has granted about 1282 foreign patents and 1507 Indian patents during the 11th 5-year plan. And totally we have got about 3250 foreign patents and 2350 Indian patents. And percentage of utilization, if you see, CSIR has got about 8.67%, which is much above the world average of 3.5. And also CSIR per patent cost is lowest in the world amongst the state-funded R&D organizations. As you see, you can see the CSIR is clearly into the patent areas and also technology development. CSIR also is in the forefront in terms of publications, got about 4,500 SCI publications on average. These are all the data which I just collected from the annual reports of CSIR. And the average impact factor is 2.28. And we also do lots of external research, and probably the data I have is 2011 is about 650 crores. CSIR focuses on research and innovation in the broader domains of science and technology, and also it employs scientists in a research capacity. Research encompasses all activities that generate new knowledge. Innovation is the translation of this knowledge into new products, processes, and services, including their implementation. The focus here is that we don't really focus on the basic research, which will not get into the practice. That's the things. We also do some basic research, which probably we end up with some sort of practical applications. This is the developments. We have got about 7,000 S&T development, got about 7,000 research scholars. And also we support scientific and academic community for the state-of-the-art R&D through 700 research schemes. Temporary placement of scientists under scientist pool. Suppose some very skillful guy is found, we will put in the scientist pool scheme as a quick hire fellow or ad hoc scientist or something like that. And also we promote creative and innovative thinking among school students. We have some programs for that. And also we have Shanti Swarup, Bhatnagar Award and Young Scientist Award to encourage the meritorious scientists. We can go to the next one. And these are the things which CSIR offers. CSIR on Youth for Leadership, it is, offers from 16 to 65 years of age. CSIR offers, you want to do PhD, ARF, and you have got a NET exam. Now engineering is also included in the NET exam. And you also get into SRF and also Shyam Prasad Mukherjee fellowships. Also, it also offers to do some PDF programs, research associateship and senior research associateship. And interaction among researchers, you can have a foreign travel grant and symposium grants, state-of-the-art R&D, research schemes, and as I said, Young Scientist and Bhatnagar Award. And also for super innovative guys, you give emeritus scientist schemes. See, the beginning in the research career, somebody who is a graduate in engineering, he can always get into junior research fellowships, provided he has got a GATE in the fields of science and technology and medical sciences. And you can also get into SRF if you have a MTech with GATE, and probably you can pursue your PhD in CSIR itself now. And we also, apart from that, we also take project fellows and senior project fellows, probably seeing your skills in that, there is a possibility that you can get into the mainstream of scientists. And also you can get into as an ad hoc scientist and quick hire fellows and trainee scientists. There are different schemes. Research can offer a very rewarding career, as a professor has rightly put it, in which a researcher embarks on a voyage of discovery, and opportunities may arise to develop new and important solutions to challenging problems. And also, if you CSIR has got a CSR 800 program, in that you just can do service. You also you get a satisfaction of that doings that you do for the 800 million pool, people who are below poverty line. You just can do lots of research activities which can cater straight away help in bringing progress or prosperity to the country. That's one sort of a sense of satisfaction if you are really working in CSIR. And career ladder in scientists in CSIR have 5 ranks. Staff employed in scientists will be promoted from one rank to the next as they gain experience and skills. Probably I can show now, as I said, with the 6 Space Commission, things are very good. And we also, in the entry level, we have changed now. You can get into, these are the cadres now, the scientists, senior scientists, principal scientists, senior principal scientists, and chief scientists. One can join with a MTech degree as a scientist and can reach the cadre of chief scientist in 11 years. This is the career progression which is available. And also, we also started an academy, a scientific and innovative research very recently. This is established in 2010 by an act of parliament. And we already have 2,500 scientists. The idea here is to make use of the state-of-the-art infrastructure. You can effectively utilize, and most of the things earlier, the practices, there are many people who have been doing research in CSIR laboratories and registering PhD in elsewhere in the universities. So now they can straight away register in ACSR Academy and then pursue their PhDs, and they can make use of all the facilities. And we have got about 2,200 students already enrolled for PhD, and 200 MTech PhD, integrated MTech PhD already done. And we have done already 2 convocations. And as I said, the Academy is would like to make it as a world-class institution of national importance. Academy will primarily focus on research and imparting training in such areas that are not orderly provided by the existing universities. Would like to, in that particular things, we want to show slight difference in that. Curricular and evaluation is innovative and directed towards creating highest quality personnel in cross-disciplinary areas. Basically, we would like to nurture the research skills. That's exactly what we try to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ram Mohan Rao. We'll, like I said, take a short 10-minute break for a question answers. And we've heard about 4 panelists now, and we'll spend about 10 minutes to sort of hear from you, and then we'll go back to hearing from the rest of the panelists, and then we'll go into a more involved discussion.
Good afternoon to all the eminent panelists. Sir, my question is to Mr. Sudhakar. Sir, you have talked about the private, how the private industries are working, and how we can grow our career in the private industry, and how we can approach it. So my point of question is that why can't we start an industry institute collaboration programs including the private partners, big private partners like the Boeing and the other people who can make use of their own requirements in accordance, and can mold up in a type of a coursework or in a type of a degree program, and that will certainly help them that the cost which they are incurring on the training of the people in the industry, that cost can be taken up in the as a form of a coursework. They will get a degree, as well as they will be taken up as a trainee or as an executive trainee. Why can't these type of programs can be promoted by the private sector industries?
We do a lot of those kind of things. Okay, we are based out of Pune, so we do with College of Engineering Pune, we do with IIT Mumbai, we are doing with IIT Chennai, IIT Madras, and we are doing with IISc. We have a program where our people who are in the organization who are BTechs, who can get master's degree with the BITS long distance program. I mean, the BITS faculty come to our campus and teach. So there are basically various things that we do specific to the research, looking at our roadmap in terms of what are the areas that we want to grow. We do approach different faculty and the universities, and we do have the collaborative research programs. And I'm talking about Eaton. I'm sure similar to Eaton, GE and various companies are Boeing, for example, all of them are engaged in these kind of things, and more of it's increasing, more and more it's happening, and it is going to increase.
So my question is slightly, I want to extend my question, is that a larger domain of students are not quite aware of these programs, either those who are associated with Eaton, or those who know through their friends in Eaton or through some of the contacts. So I am saying that why can't we make it available for a larger domain of students? For why can't we take these schemes to the private colleges, to the colleges where people are not much aware of these opportunities, where they think that campus placement is the final virtue, or going through the gate is the final virtue. I am saying about a larger, covering a larger domain of students.
See, again, on those things, we are running a business, right? So there are definitely, there will be, it's not like our job is not to promote only the, outside things, right? External things. But having said that, there are a lot of those things are happening in India, and then we do personally, as Eaton, there is something called Ignited Innovators of India. That's a program where we are actually going to 60,000 people, engineering graduate students across Maharashtra, and asking them to come out with ideas which have social relevance, and then we fund them. So those kind of things we do, which has a much broader reach. And the other one is through SAE. There are various events to promote, the engineering and research, like SAE Baza is there, and SAE Aerospace, we do a lot of events, and where we go and teach, and we invite people to get in the whole thing participating. And we do get a lot of other engineering colleges, not just IITs. We have a SAE Fine program where all the lecturers from different universities come to us, and we show what we do in our industry, so that they get benefited and their curriculum gets influenced. And our students, our employees, actually they go and teach in some of the universities as faculty. So all these things happen. What happens is, if you are interested in them, it's also your initiative in terms of how do you get connected with people and see it, and some of them are also mentioned on the websites.
Is there any entry in CSIR Institute after PhD?
I didn't get the question.
You mentioned about JRF and SRF. After, so
right.
For PhDs who have completed PhD, or
if somebody has completed PhD, you can as well, depends upon the area, you can approach the laboratories. You can get into the laboratories as ad hoc scientists. You can straight away get into the position of senior scientist. A PhD can see a position of a senior scientist.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is to Narasimhan, sir. So, as a faculty member in academics, what is the toughest challenge you face? What is the toughest challenge you face? Which is very hard.
Few of students, if you are not passionate, if you have come here because when you are entering a research program, especially, if you come in and say, this is yet another job, or I am actually getting some skill sets and so on, then it's difficult. You need motivation. When I say that is creating that motivation is the toughest challenge. It takes a year, two, maybe even more sometimes, to get to the stage where the student starts thinking about this problem as a life and death kind of thing. And then I know that they are motivated. So that's a tough challenge. The other challenge is from the administrative side. I personally, I'm not very fond of administrative activities. So essentially when I get that and it takes me away from what I would want to do, then sometimes I do get down a lot because of that. Because it does take, our bureaucratic thing is still what you call, eats away a lot of useful time. I don't think we value time. That's something that the Indian society itself has not learned, I think, over the years, that every minute is precious. Somehow I feel there's so much, a lot of bureaucracy that we can do away with. If that's done, then obviously those are the two challenges I would say. Otherwise, none at all.
We'll take one more question.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to ask a question from Professor Shankar, sir. So, like you talked about teaching in an interesting way. So, apart from the methodology of chalk and talk and the PowerPoints, like slides teachers use for teaching. So, like what do you suggest that are the interesting ways of grabbing the attention of the students, and they are always like looking forward to the classes and do not take it in a monotonous way and do not just attend for having attendance. So some interesting ways which you could suggest?
I certainly agree. I have used only chalk and talk most of the time, and I feel that I have not done justice. I try to make the class interesting by being a little humorous and so on and so forth. I mean, I try to, but that's not the issue. If you want to provide technical content today, I think you need to actually come up with innovative ways, because the concepts are getting difficult, and it is therefore requires a lot of effort. I am learning it. I'm not going to say that I'm expert. What I find is there are tools today that allow you to illustrate, okay, conceptual thing through figures. There are excellent computational tools. To just give you an example, we are looking at teaching linear algebra. For example, it's a very, what I would call a very esoteric thing. I mean, you talk about spaces and so on, and you get spaced out right away. So there is a tool called GeoGebra. You may want to go and look at it, and excellent content has been created by faculty members all over the world to teach linear algebraic concepts through diagrams, right? It's completely computational, and you learn all of it not by listening to words, but doing it yourself. And there are lots and lots of content that have been created. Only now, after so many years, we are ourselves exploring what I would call the ability of tools, visual tools, in order to illustrate concepts, difficult concepts. It requires time to develop these things, but I think they are available, and that's the way to go. And I'm not sure just a PowerPoint is going to help. It is these ways, active ways of teaching, that might actually be helpful in disseminating especially difficult concepts easily to students and getting them hooked onto it.
Okay, thank you again. A significant fraction of the growth in the GDP as well as jobs over the last few years has come from the IT sector. So it would be doing injustice to that major fraction if we didn't include panelists from that sector, and thankfully we do have. So our next two panelists, Dr. Padmanabhan and Dr. Apparao, are going to talk about career prospects in the IT sector.
Yes, it is true that TCS is branded as a software company, and it is true that we do software. But Tata Steel had a general tagline earlier saying, "We also make steel." So I think it is true that we also make software. We really are into helping business achieve its potential. Perhaps using computers, perhaps using other labor-saving techniques. But eventually, it is all about people. How do people interact? How do people talk to each other? Just to give you some examples, some major areas of research, and I'm picking these at random. Social media. How can playing around with Facebook and Twitter be analyzed, be exploited, be made very effective to try and solve real business problems? Sustainability. How can the carbon footprint be reduced while still getting good energy needs? How can difficult problems like wind forecasting or water utilization and discovery be solved in a very unique and innovative way? Health. How can personalized genomes, do individual genome sequencing be used to try and develop personalized medicine so that people can get drugs that are of interest or will cure them, even though for the general population that drug has very significant risks. For you personally, that drug is extremely effective. How do you try and find such things? Education, I think Professor Shankar Narasimhan has talked very extensively about the problems of education. How do we tackle educating the vast population of India and enable India to realize its potential by doing, let's say, skill enhancement, let's say much more advanced things, have them develop passion for learning and for perhaps even doing research. Speech, how do we try and get speech technologies, especially in Indian languages? How do we try and get computers to understand the Indian languages? How do you get communications? Agriculture. India is very much an agricultural country, and I'm sure Professor Jhunjhunwala will talk a lot about it. How do we try and address real technology issues to try and solve the farmers' problems? These go from the very strongly esoteric, how do we write an optimization program to do crop rotation for a farmer? Should a farmer in Tanjore with the scarcity of water grow rice or grow corn or grow tomatoes? Which one would be the most effective given the fertility, given the other types of things in there? How do we try and, everyone has played around with second world and try and come up with virtual worlds. How can we use virtual worlds to solve very, very strong business problems, to visualize what happens on an oil drill, to try and get, to make sure that what happened in the Gulf of Mexico doesn't recur by having appropriate simulation? How do we get a bunch of people around the world to work together to solve a problem by using some of the technologies that are available for groupware? Yes, all of these use computers, but the computers are just ways of solving the problem. We in TCS believe very strongly in creating a very high level of research comparable to anything that you can find in academia, with a strong business focus, a strong industrial thing, and it doesn't matter which area. So one of the critical things we are trying to do is in materials engineering to try and see what sort of processes can be modeled in, as I say, in silico, and used to try and deliver gears or deliver steel, which is totally different and has the properties you want. These are all various different things. As I said, we currently have about 400 to 500 researchers who address various problems in these areas. I suppose I think what was the introduction said it all. They're able to follow their passion, have fun, and make money in the process, and make a difference. I think the critical thing is that whatever problems they solve, make a difference in the real world. They are picking real world problems. I'm not saying academia never picks real world problems, but a lot of the academic problems tend to be a little esoteric, as as Professor Shankar Narasimhan pointed out. But trying to solve real world problems, addressing them, trying to solve it in a time frame perhaps, puts additional pressures and additional challenges. And to make it economically viable, rather than just solving an academic problem, is also a very interesting and challenging problem. The basic thing we managed to do in TCS, I think, which is perhaps a little unique, we interact a lot with academics. So we have what we call academic liaison program, and we have a COIN program, co-innovation program, where we work significantly with different major universities throughout the world, the likes of MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, different universities in India, a lot of the IITs, some in Australia, and so on. We also work, and this is the interesting part, with major startup, not major, with startup companies which show a lot of promise. And the advantage of startup companies is that they are technologically exciting. And you would get the opportunity when working in TCS to try and work with these startup companies and get acclimatized to what are the recent technologies, how do we try and apply them, and solve real problems using these technologies in whatever you create. That's perhaps not the only way we can influence what you're doing. TCS has something called a research scholarship program, which you can apply for while you're doing a PhD, to try and take advantage of some additional interesting problems, opportunities to work as interns in TCS, try and take away real problems and try and solve them in your institute environment. It's a very major program. I believe we have something like 200 scholarships or so on, and every year we are getting more into the thing. So I would strongly advise you as a research scholar to get involved in this. We are also very keen on your coming and doing sabbaticals, internships, any sort of involvement, depending on the level of interest you have with us in any of our 20 innovation labs which we have around the world. Some of these labs, by the way, are research-oriented. Some are more application-oriented. If you are interested in a specific industry, such as insurance or retail, they have very, very critical problems that we need all the insight you can provide to try and get them. So, summarizing, it's a place which there's a strong level of passion, very high level of research, collaboration with leading universities and leading researchers, ability to solve real problems that matter to the world and solve them in an economic and effective manner. And definitely have fun in the process, working with leading researchers around the world. So effective have we been in this area that our market capitalization, which is one way of measuring how useful a company is the largest in India and the second largest for any IT company in the world. I think that's a very strong achievement, and we invite you to come and continue in its growth.
Dr. Padmanabhan. I request Dr. Apparao to share his view. By the way, just as a matter of introduction, he was a research scholar and a PhD from IIT Madras. So,
yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon to the panelists. He was my colleague, Dr. Mr. Paddy, and I was with the TCS earlier. Then I was with Cognizant.
One of the old sayings that used to be said in TCS is almost everyone in any gathering you would have either is in TCS, was in TCS, or wants to be in TCS. He was one of the second.
I think before going into that one, I think Paddy covered that one, and I think as the Professor Mahesh mentioned that one, that I think the IT industry is important. I think one of the things I request you, all of you, to read an article. I think McKinsey has written around October 2012 on the second economy. It's basically a digital economy. He talks about it. And I think I request you all, you should read it and all, because how the world is changing and what the IT industry has done it and all till now. Before going into that one, I think I'll tell you my little bit background. I think as the professor mentioned, I did my PhD from physics department, but most of my samples from chemistry. So I used to go there, and I used to do most of the time, around 70% of the time, I used to spend in computer science department, processing the data. So I'd done that one. I'd done my PhD in 1982. Then I went to the postdoctoral degree for University of Wisconsin-Madison in the biochemistry department, where Corona got the Nobel Prize and all. So I worked with nucleic acids. Finally, I left all these fields and all, landed in computer science. But I don't know and all, but I think some of the panelists mentioned what are the capabilities of a person required to do a job. But when I completed my PhD, I think I got an offer from IPCL Baroda, the research scientist. And then again, also I got an offer from ONGC as a computer programmer. But all the academic community in IIT advised me should go to ONGC. I went to ONGC, still left that job, and I went to my postdoctoral degree. Again in US, somebody advised me, I think it's good for you, go back to your computer science. Then I think I took his advice and done courses there in Madison and all, came back and continued my IT career. I think as Paddy mentioned and all, I worked with Cognizant for 17 years. When I joined, the company had 100 people. Now I think there are around 1.5 lakh people. One of the things I have done is how we can take the current technology to solve the problems, as Paddy mentioned. Mainly we try to solve the business problem. What are the things, how we can able to solve using the current technology. I think one of the things I found is, I think if there is a will is there, I think what I found is the number of problems are finite. If you put together your head and take advantage of the technology, you can able to solve the technology problems very, very effectively. I think what we do is I think what you've done in Cognizant is what we do is take any of these emerging technologies, take this thing, what are the potential this technology is having, how it can able to effectively solve the business problem or any of these problems, and come up with, analyze these technologies and see that thing, how technology can be applied and solve this business problem. One of the things also I want to mention, I think through my journey from as a researcher into the real world, actually the MNC and actually industry, is a long and painful one. I think, as you know, I spent around 6 or 7 years in the labs, spending from morning 8 to night 12 o'clock and all. Suddenly I went into the industry. Actually, it took me around 5 to 6 years to understand what is the industry and all, how we can able to mold ourselves from a research scholar to the industry. The expectations are entirely different. I think what I came up with the theory, I think some people may not be able to agree, but if you become more and more academic, if you do PhD and postdoctoral, what I found is you'll become more and more idealistic, but the world is not that one. If you go to MTech, then you become more idealistic, you move away from the system. Then you go for PhD, then you go further. Then it is very difficult to go back and work with the system. So it will take a lot of time to understand the system and deal with it. I think what I request, as Professor mentioned it, for the most of the research scholars, is advisable to be in academic career or the research career. Go to industry is very tough. Is like I tell my teams and all that is any organization, any group is like playing two different games. I usually give this example to that. If you play volleyball, you play with hands, not with your legs. Am I right? But if you play football, you play with legs and not the hands. But if you do other way, you will be out of the game and they may ban you for lifetime. The same thing happened in the industry and academia. Second thing also, as I think one of the panelists already mildly mentioned, I think first is you have to understand the value system. For each job, there are the value system is there. Actually, people went on, I heard a talk on by a research fellow, that actually each job they categorize as a feminine job or a masculine job. So you may have to understand when you are taking up a job, I think you are a research scholar, that's why I'm telling to you, is that you should very clearly know what is your value system, what is the value system required by the job or by the company. If it doesn't match, I think one of the panelists already mentioned mildly, but that is a very, very important point. If you don't do it, you go there unnecessarily and you burn your hand. I think why I mentioned is when I'm going through my journey in the industry, I asked one of the management gurus, what is this thing most of the times we engineers or scientists slog around, but finally the CEO or MD is from usually from marketing and sales or from MBA degree. What is wrong with us? Why can't we do it? Then he said, you study too much science. You know only binary, 0 or 1. But the world is fuzzy logic. Somebody tells you, okay, you may have to grow 25% in southern region. We don't have any idea and all. So what I request you is when you're jumping into the industry, little bit careful whether you have to, even I advise also, a lot of people want to do MBA and all. First they have to find out whether they fit for MBA program or not. Otherwise, you come over there, I think you may not be able to utilize your capabilities and all. I think, yeah, your research scholars, I think by this time you know that thing. Why you joined the research program. Am I right? And similarly, you should know also, what is your value system, what type of job you want to take. You should be very clear. Otherwise, unnecessarily you lose your life and all, as Professor mentioned. You may do job and all, you may not enjoy it. Done? I think a couple of things, I think, as I mentioned on the similar lines, I think one of the things improves, I think you have to improve the communication skills and all. I think as Paddy is there next to me, I think we might have hired thousands of people. What we see is the communication skills and whether the person has ability or is understood the subject and all very well. I think maybe we can talk offline and all. I'll end here.
Thank you, Dr. Apparao. Like Dr. Apparao mentioned, the biggest part of this workshop where you will benefit is in the tea session, where you can actually walk up to Dr. Apparao or any other panelist and ask the question that you cannot ask publicly over a microphone. Okay, so please take advantage of it. Having said that, I want to introduce Dr. Bala Bharadwaj. Bala, I'm sure, is no stranger to IIT Madras. He has talked here a couple of times, right? Through the Office of International and Alumni Relations. And he represents Boeing, the private sector. and aerospace industry more specifically. Let's hear his thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. Interesting conversations. It's very hard to be the last speaker when you are doing a panel like this. I know we have one other person in between who volunteered to skip over, but nevertheless, it's very interesting to listen to all the different points of view. Earlier Professor Shankar Narasimhan, gave this what I would say very impassioned plea about how wonderful it is to be a faculty member. I started my career as a faculty member. After 6 years, I switched to the industry, and I never regretted that. So, he has his cup of tea, I have my cup of tea. Also, I think, many of you are, in research, maybe some of you are contemplating going to a PhD program. It is very, very important to understand what you are learning in those programs, whether it's a PhD program or an MTech program. Majority of the people, I would say more than 90% of the people think that they are becoming an expert in that particular field. I think that's only part of the story. If you are really getting a PhD, what you should learn is how to do research. Not about becoming an expert. If you become an expert, that is great, but you should learn how to do research. I have changed my career about 5 times already in my lifetime, and I only had to work in 2 different companies to do that. One was a university, and the other one was the same company, but I've done many, many different things. Not because I'm an expert in each of those areas, but because I know how to do research. A researcher should be able to solve new problems, which means there is no guidebook available to you. Even if you are an expert in a particular area, that may or may not help you when a new problem is thrown at you. So it's very important to understand why you do research and what you should expect out of doing research. Can we go to those charts? I did have a few charts I would like to walk you through. Some comments have already been made, so I won't dwell on those, but maybe there's a slightly different, no, that's not the one. Oh, what did we do? I think I got the wrong charts here. Forget it. So I just walk you through. I think I picked up the wrong chart. Never mind. Okay. So when it comes to your career, there is a progression going all the way from basic science to technology to engineering to manufacturing and finally producing a product. Now, universities generally work in the basic science area. Very important to understand phenomena, how they relate to each other, how they can be modified. But then when you go to the realm of technology, it begins to ask the question, what do I do with this knowledge? Where do I apply it? And if you are really talking about a product, then you have to take this knowledge from science and technology and create something that somebody wants. If I create a great product and nobody wants it, it's a dud product. It may accomplish wonderful things, but nobody cares for it, and the business cannot support working on that area. So when you are doing research or engineering, for that matter, in a business enterprise, it is not only what are these wonderful things you are doing from a science perspective, but it also becomes very important what improvement, what value can these scientific principles bring to the table. For example, if you look at airplanes, I'll take an example of the Boeing 747 airplane. The first 747 landed in Chennai airport in 1970. So the aircraft was already designed, in the mid to late 60s. Today also we have a Boeing 747, which largely looks the same from outside, but it is nothing like this airplane with the same name that was built in the late 60s. There's a lot of technological innovation in there which goes to improve various parts of that particular machine. And this is true in most cases. Look at cars. Look at automobiles that were built in the 60s and 70s versus the automobiles that are built today. They all have 4 wheels, they have steering wheel, but then what else do they have? What are the materials they are made out of? So when you go to industry, the emphasis of the research or the engineering is very, very different from what you would do. You know, like Sudhakar mentioned, yes, we also teach, yes, we also do certain things. You know, we also can publish. You know, there are many patents owned by the Boeing company. There are many publications owned by people who work for the Boeing company. So we can do things that a university does, but we do it in a different forum. Actually, one of the reasons I quit being a professor is because I was working in the US. I had to make an emergency trip to India, and I was almost not going to make the trip because my chairman basically said I can't leave the university in the middle of the semester. So I said, you know what, I'm going anyway. And then when I went back, I gave him my resignation letter. Okay, so it's not like one is better than the other. It depends on what your interest is, depends on what you are motivated by. But it is very important. I think Sudhakar made that point earlier. Completely agree with him. It's extremely important that you think about why you want to do this job. What is your motivation? Is it because you want to make money? Do you want to get famous? Do you want to solve problems? What kinds of problems? You know, if you work in an aerospace industry, you help to improve either the defense capability of countries or transportation capabilities of people. If you work in the pharmaceutical industry, you create new drugs. Is that more important, or is it more important to be able to teach, maybe let's say 50,000 students in your lifetime? So each one of us is driven by a different motivation, but as a person who is getting into your career, it's very, very important that you think about what is your motivation. The other thing I will throw on top of that is that this motivation that you have may not stay the same throughout your career. Today when you are about to graduate from college, you may think, here is what drives you. And then after some time, you may get married. Your parents may have certain ideas. There may be other life-changing events that happen to you. And you may have to you may have to change your goal because you are not the center of the goal. You pick up responsibilities. There are many people that I know who used to have flourishing careers in the US. They have come back for some family reasons. So what you consider your goal doesn't stay static. It is something that keeps changing. Okay? Planning. Let me give you, I want to make one point about planning because your panel said it was goals and planning and advancement and so forth. It is very, very difficult, in my opinion, to sit, when you are 25 years old or 22 years old or something, and then plan out your career till you retire for the next, say, 40 years. It's extremely difficult. There are positions, there are technologies, there are opportunities that will be created that we don't even know how to spell today. So if you sit here and say, this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life, you are kidding yourself. I'll give you an example of how many of you recognize the name Rudy Giuliani? Okay, I guess he's not as famous as I thought he would be. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York City during the year 2001. And 2001 is when the infamous 9/11 happened. And I happened to attend a talk given by Rudy Giuliani a few years after that. And he was kind of explaining, his experiences doing 9/11. And basically he said in the mayor's office, they had scenarios, they had plans for doing handling variety of crises. What happens if there is a, water main that bursts? What happens if there is a major accident on the metro system? What happens if there is a major power outage in New York City? How will they handle that crisis? Nobody thought about what will happen if this, two big towers crash coming down, because of some terrorist attack. But the fact that they had done the planning and created certain workarounds or certain ways to address the crisis for all these other disasters helped them immensely to address the crisis when 9/11 happened. So planning is very important, but don't be so rigid that in 2 years from now or 3 years from now some event happens, some opportunity comes up, and you say, well, it's not in my plan, therefore I cannot do that. You know, you will be fooling yourself and you'll actually be making the wrong choices. That planning that you do today should enable you, should help you to make choices as you go forward. So planning is very important, so do plan, but be very flexible in terms of how you implement the plan. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you, Bala. How many of you believe you've identified a societal problem that requires a solution, whether somebody found a solution or not? Each of you. That's the start of, you know, where an entrepreneur comes in. And to tell us more, we're very fortunate to have Professor Jhunjhunwala, who has not only incubated many, but is involved with an incubator himself. So we'll hear both sides of it.
Thank you. It was really enjoyable listening to all my fellow panelists. Learned a lot about oil industry and learned the kind of research challenge that exists. Other areas, probably I was a little more familiar. I certainly agree with Shankar that there is no better career than teachers. And particularly being a teacher and a faculty at IIT Madras. So, what do I tell you about being an entrepreneur? To start a company, do you see that instead of taking up a job anywhere, whether in an institute or at TCS or Cognizant or Boeing or at ONGC, would you rather think of jumping in and starting a company? What does it give you? First of all, is it easy? I can certainly say that it will not be easy. It will be the toughest job that you ever have done. Probably tougher than doing your PhD. I think being an entrepreneur is tough. There is some outside glamour associated with it, because you hear about all these stories about entrepreneurs who have become extremely successful. What you don't often hear, for every successful entrepreneur, there are at least 15, 20, probably 30 who have failed. So entrepreneurship also will teach you, whether you like it or not, to fail. So what am I here doing, talking about that you should think of entrepreneurship as after you graduate, after you finish your PhD, finish your master's? Well, I can only say that being an entrepreneur makes you more complete in every way than anything else. It is not about technology, though technology probably for the ventures that you will start with, technology will play a major role. And I'll talk briefly about it a little later. But entrepreneurship and a venture is not about technology. Just because you have a technology and you have done some wonderful research work and come up with excellent product, as was pointed out, that will not make you necessarily successful. You need to be able to make a product that people want. And that was what was often, that people are willing to spend money on. People are willing to buy. And I think that's important, where people are willing to buy that. And because finally, venture is about running a business. And when you run a business, you have to worry about technology, you have to worry about finances, you have to worry about rentals, you have to worry about hiring people, keeping them, rather than just being an employee who can decide to opt out. You have to now attract and keep them. You have to motivate them. Being an entrepreneur, it is up to you to manage your cash flows and worry about rentals. It is up to you to worry about the revenue and see that the revenue is sufficient to take care of all these expenses. So by no means an easy chance, easy thing to do. But I also say, even if you do at any stage of your life, whether right after you graduate, or maybe 5 years down the line, or maybe 20 years down the line, the way Shankar has decided to take a little time off and become an entrepreneur. Becoming an entrepreneur and attempting to make something successful, ready to fail, but trying hardest to succeed, and if you fail, not give up, try once again, that makes you a very, very different human being. It is something that one cannot describe. It is like you have achieved things. You have really made a difference to your own life and to the world, probably far more than any other career can do. I have personally incubated 50 companies at IIT Madras. Numbers have crossed 50. And I've seen these 50 set of individuals, mostly my own students, mostly our students, but they are not necessarily IIT students. Sometimes students from other places walk in and say, we want to start a company, and if I find them that they are really motivated and passionate, I've actually helped them start a company. And I've seen this set of 50 people, and associated with each company there are on the average 3-4 people who have founded the company. So I've seen this 150 or 200 people, actually keep track of them. And I think they have grown today far, far more, whether they have succeeded or they have failed, far, far more than the other 10, 20,000 youngsters or students that I have known of. There are others who have had a brilliant career as an academician, or a brilliant career as a researcher in a company, or brilliant career as a salesperson in a company. They probably may have even made huge amount of money. But in terms of being a much more rounded personality, able to have the confidence, the sense of achievement, I think anybody who has gone through entrepreneurship, it is a difference. It's very difficult to describe. It is something that one has to experience. It has to be people who have actually done this. You need to know them, and when you actually get to know them, you see that there is something distinctly different between them and you, whether they are successful or not. Now that is the only reason I'll sort of say, sometime in your career, when you are bored of doing whatever you are doing, decide to opt out and start a company. Face the difficulty. You are going to try to create something, and the process itself is going to be so rewarding. Of course, if your venture becomes successful, you get other rewards also. But it doesn't matter whether the venture gets successful or not. Now, as I pointed out here, I have incubated 50 companies. There are many more companies that have been incubated at IIT Madras. And today we are incubating something close to 15 to 20 companies at IIT Madras every year. And we are going to accelerate this pace to maybe higher number, more like 25, 30 companies. Why are we doing that? Why is IIT making entrepreneurship as an important career option? Why is it spending so much effort in doing that? And especially, how does it relate to people who are basically in research? If you look at the nation, if you look at the country, one of the biggest weakness is high-tech industry. In fact, every problem that he pointed out of the oil industry could actually be taken up by some entrepreneur and solved. He has actually listed out 6, 7, 8 different challenges. Each of them are worth starting a company. If you want to really let the industry grow, high-tech technology, taking the high-tech technology, making products and services out of it is a crucial thing that only a few companies in India have started doing. There are companies like his company, Boeing, GE, others are coming in to India and are doing that. But very few Indian companies have actually done that. There are companies, I won't say there are not. Today there are many more companies than there were 10, 15 years back. Padmanabhan mentioned some of the things that TCS does, but there are Mahindras, there are many companies, number of Tata Ventures are actually trying to develop technology. But yet the number of high technology product companies in India is small. And I think it's extremely critical that the young people take up a challenge and say, we will take this up and we will come up with the next way of generating hydrogen at a much, much cheaper cost, which will help our oil industry go to a very different level. Or take up a challenge like some of the early companies that we took up with. We, long back, about 1993-94, when India had only about 7 million telephones and was adding only 1 million telephone a year, and there was a waiting list typically. I had to wait 8 years to get a telephone. It is at that time Bhaskar Ramurthy, the current director, and I said that, well, we will do whatever is required to make 100 million telephones available in India over the next 10 years. And everybody laughed at us. And we actually helped incubate number of companies, created technology, and took it all the way to the market. And in 10 years, in 12 years, 14 years, we see not just 100 million, but 900 million telephones. In fact, I was just talking about to some of the people that some people are asking me, what are you trying to do? I'll sort of say, we have recognized that power is a major, major problem in the country. And there doesn't appear to be an easy solution. A lot of attempts has been done here and there, but there is no out-of-box thinking and way of making a difference. And again, some of us have taken up a challenge. Again, Dr. Bhaskar Ramurthy, myself, and a few of us have taken up a challenge. In the next 12 to 15 years, we will see to it that 50% of India's power comes from solar photovoltaic. Now, whenever we do take up challenges of this kind, it doesn't matter whether we succeed or fail. Even taking up a big goals of this kind, we will drive companies after companies. Number of companies will come, succeed, fail, learn, and move on. So that is what the entrepreneurship is all about. And I do feel that it is something that you should look at, watch, see what's going on. Look at our incubator, see the kind of companies that are coming up. Learn from that. Somewhere in your career, think about opting out and starting a company. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Junjunwala. The climate at IIT Madras.
And India has won the last test match in the case those who are interested.
No, the climate at IIT Madras has never been more ripe to start your own company. And you should bombard Professor Junjunwala with more questions over tea. Now, let me just quickly summarize. I hope you got a flavor of what it takes to get into each of these lines of employment, of building your own career. But the bottom line is you have to know what you really love to do. Whether you get paid or not, let's say if the government had a guaranteed income scheme for everybody in the country, what would you do? If you knew the answer to that question, then you've decoupled pay from passion. Go after your passion and the pay automatically comes. I think that is the part that you really, really have to sit down before any placement season, identify for yourselves. Without that exercise, your placement season is take the first job you get. Just like take the first MS or PhD offer you get. Just like take the first high school admission you get. Just like take the branch that your JEE rank gets. Let this last choice be slightly more logical in the way you go about it. I hope you got some inputs, but the most important part is to come now over tea. Please join us for tea in the auditorium. There's desks arranged for all the panelists, so you can walk up to any of the desks and ask the question that's been bothering you. Thank you again for coming. Okay.
I'd request Dr. Mahesh to hand over the mementos to the dignitaries over here. I'd request Dr. Sarit Kumar Das to hand over the mementos to the panelists. Okay. names. Dr. Apara, GVN Apara. Mr. Sudhakar Potukuchi. Professor Shankar Narsimhan. Dr. Bala Bharadwaj. Mr. Kishore Padmanabhan. Dr. Ram Mohan Rao. Mr. A.S. Basu. Okay. Professor Ashok Jhunjhunwala. And Dr. Mahesh. Please join us for